What's happening, Saints fans? Steve Geller, Jeff Nowak, inside Black and Gold, a post-preseason, post-roster cuts, post-practice squad edition of the show, and got a lot to get to. And I know first off the bat, we got some news to get off the way with the Black and Gold, obviously.
Yeah, this is going to be the roster breakdown show. Like I said on the last episode, I didn't want to overreact to the initial 53 because there's probably going to be changes. I kind of want to wait out waivers, wait out the practice squad, and see where we are. I still don't think we've waited long enough because there's still one person that's either going to get cut or moved to IR that we don't know who it is. And that's going to be a corresponding move of the trade that hasn't been announced yet, but we know is happening. So, this is still going to be dated. My whole goal was to make sure we could record this and not have to update it or not be wrong about the players on the roster. And I still can't say that. Anyway, I'm not annoyed or anything, but we're going to go through it. We're going to go through the news and notes, kind of a rundown in this segment. I also want to get into, okay, what was the most surprising cut and what was the most surprising keep from the 53-man roster cut down. And that's just going to kind of be a teaser into the fuller episode, which is we're going to break down the whole roster. So we're going to start with the defense and special teams in segment 2, go through every position, talk about, what we think if we would have done anything differently, that sort of thing. Final segment, we're going to do the same thing on the offense. And then we're going to do a quick rundown of all 16 players. And there's only 16. I don't know why I held up 2 fingers, but there's only 16 players on the practice squad currently. So I think there's going to be one more once that exemption for Charlie Smith clears, which I assume is the reason you haven't signed 17 players yet. But that's just an assumption by me. I don't know. These rules are dumb. Anyway, news. So first things first. Was that a drum roll?
Yeah, it was a weak one.
Nice. Nice. News. First things first. Marshawn Lattimore, Kool-Aid McKinstry, Rashid Shaheed, all back at practice on Wednesday. And I think this was an obvious target point for all these players. Like, if you're like, we don't need to see you in the preseason. We're not going to try to force you back ahead of week 3 of the preseason just for kicks, right? Like, Marshawn, we want to have you ready for week 1. So you want to get him back at this point so you can kind of ramp in. They didn't have a full practice on Tuesday or Wednesday. They are going to have Friday, Saturday, Sunday off prior to the first kind of game week setup ahead of the Carolina game. So getting him back now, I think, is helpful. He would have been limited if they had a practice participation report, which the injury report, they don't have to do that this week. But DA did tell us he would have been limited if they had to put one out. So hopefully by Monday, you'll have him back to full participation, or Wednesday, because that's the first injury report. But probably bigger news in terms of Kool-Aid, because I was more concerned about that knee injury and how long it might keep him out than I was necessarily about Marshawn, which always kind of felt like, do your thing, right? Yeah, exactly. Rashid Shaheed, I got to talk to in the locker room. His toe injury concerned me a little bit, just because it was the second injury at camp, and Dia had been pretty vocal about, like, hey, I want these guys out here. It's a new offense. I want him to learn it, and he hadn't been out there. But sounds like he's in good shape. He's bulked up a little bit. He needs to block, and we'll see how that goes. But good to get all 3 of those guys back. One more is Kendre Miller, who was on IR, like I said he would be. I was talking about that before. It was cool. Anyway, don't need to get any further into that. But he was out at practice, not participating, because he actually can't participate right now.
Right.
Because he's on IR.
So now he misses, the first 4 games at least?
He's going to miss the first 4 games. There's a point where you can return to practice ahead of that. I think it would be like you can open a 21-day return window prior to week 4 prior to week 5. So like you can get him back to practice, and then you would have to bring him back within 21 days, or he's done for the season. Either way, he was out there in uniform. I don't know what exactly that means in terms of where he's at in his rehab process, but it's at least a good sign to see him around the team. I don't know. Like, there's still images of him. It's funny because even in the still images, I'm just like, he doesn't even look like he's trying that hard, but it's like, it's a still image. I shouldn't try to interpret a still image, but even then it's like, he's stretching his quad. And I'm just like, is he even doing that right? I don't know. But it's good to see him back out there, and we can go from there.
Yeah, that's, I would say, the biggest disappointment, I guess, of this training camp was the fact that I think there was a lot of expectations around Kendre Miller going into this year. We might have even talked about it. Fantasy football folks were even like, oh, you might want to, draft Kendre Miller because he's going to end up unseating Alvin Kamara as the number 1 running back. Please pump those brakes.
Yeah, I mean, I've been asked to go on fantasy football podcasts, and that was like one of the first questions they asked. Like, do you see a scenario where Kendre Miller takes Alvin's job? And I'm like, well, I don't know. I'd like to see him play football first. Like, can we get that out of the way, and then we can start talking about, the future at the running back position? But we'll see. Either way, nice to see him back. Two other bits of news. The Saints made one waiver claim, which every year we talk. I fall into this trap. Everyone falls into this trap where we're like, oh, they're going to be so active on the waiver wire. And then they make one claim and it's not anyone you expected. They did put in more than one waiver request. Only one got through. So that's important to note. Like they put in a claim, at least one claim on a guy who went to Carolina, a different DB named Shamar. They cut their own Shamar and tried to claim another Shamar. So, that's something. But the only claim they got that went through was for Kene Nwangwu. Did you?
Goo.
No, it's a W.
No, the ending goo.
Woo.
Right? Woo?
There's a W at the end. Nwangwu. Yeah. Nwangwu.
Oh, yeah. GW I thought was goo.
It's Woo. Nwangwu.
Okay. I got you.
Nwangwu. I think it's technically like Nwangwu, but that's just too much for my brain to.
Can't wait to find out his nickname.
I'm just going to call him Kene.
Yeah, there you go.
But he's more of a return special. He is a running back, and I think it's possible that you get some work for him at running back, especially if there are some injuries. But I think his main role, and I had to ask DA to clarify this because I've never heard the term core 4 before. But he said it so confidently. I was like, should I know this? Is this something that I should be aware of? Like, is this a term that everyone in this room knows but me? And by that, he meant like all 4 special teams. Like, so punt coverage, kick, return, kick coverage, right? So they would want him to be involved in all 4 of those. And they think he can contribute in all 4 of those.
Yeah, come on, Jeff. The core 4.
The core 4. He could be a core 4 guy. I think it's like there's no way that's like a common lexicon thing, and I'm the only one. But so that is what it means. If you hear DA say core 4, that's what he's referring to, is all 4 special teams units. Like, and it makes sense because if you want to add a return specialist and you already have a return specialist, you kind of need that guy to also be able to go down and make a tackle, right? Like, you're not going to have Rashid. He's a special teams ace,
right?
But he's not going to cover kicks, right? You're not going to ask him to do that. You're going to ask him to return kicks. So he wouldn't be a core 4 guy. He would be a core 2 guy, I guess. I don't know. But that's
the Vikings let him go too, because you see, was an All-Pro in 2022.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's what Darren's always got his eyes on those players, right? Like, I think Darren has a voice in that process, and I'm sure he's a guy that Darren really likes. And so we'll see. And we talked to Darren prior to the season, and he made it clear, like, he sees the like, not only do you need one special teams ace, one return ace, you really want to have 2, because on the kickoff, for example, if you throw Taysom Hill and Rashid Shaheed out there 99 times out of 100, maybe 100 times out of 100, the kickoff team knows exactly who they want to kick it to. It's going to be Taysom Hill, right? Or use any example you want, Jordan Mims. Like, if whoever is standing across from Rashid, that guy's going to get the ball. Well, what if that's also an all-pro return guy? Who do you kick it to, right? I think in most cases, they'll just kick it out of the back of the end zone. But if the worst-case scenario I have is I start every drive at the 30 and they're not trying to take advantage of a lesser returner, then that's a win for me, right? Because I don't have to start any drives at the 10 because that guy screwed up or he muffed a kick. And then there's going to be points where guys do kick to him. And either way, you're going to feel real good about it. Hey, do I look older? It's Jeff Nowak coming at you from the future, at least from the guy who's been talking to you, because the Saints have waived Kene Nwangwu with an injury designation. He failed his physical, so I guess we can stop talking about him. The Saints are back where they started. Maybe they'll go look for another return ace. Maybe they won't. But I did want to get that into this podcast because we spent a good time talking about a guy who's not here. And that's why recording a podcast around the NFL is annoying, because this happens all the time. There's also been a couple more practice squad moves. This will keep happening. But the Saints have signed tight end Treyton Welch to the practice squad. They've also signed offensive tackle Austin Deculus to the practice squad and waived tight end Mason Fairchild. So as you go further into this podcast, understand that if there's any references to Mason Fairchild, to any roster spots that they'll probably add to, understand that's been changed. So without further ado, let's get you back to the younger version of me on this here stream.
One other thing, we see more of this new kickoff rule in action come the regular season, because preseason was definitely a little blasé for me.
Yeah, I talked to Rashid about that, and he made a good point, which is, one thing, and this is something I've been talking about. The blocking is going to be behind. Like teams are it's going to take a little longer for the blocking to catch up, because that's something that's the new part for a lot of these players. They've all run down field and tried to make tackle on kicks before. That's where they start from is new, but the concept isn't necessarily new. From a blocking perspective, that's something that none of them had to do before, which is wait and then go one-on-one block across the line. He also mentioned that there's a lot of scheme and a lot of planning and ideas that you have not seen yet, right? Like no one wants to put their what they think will be a winning special team strategy on tape in the preseason. They want to save that for when it counts, right? So I do think that you're seeing a lot of basic stuff right now, and there's going to be some teams that gain an advantage by being creative in how they block and how they scheme up returns. And we already know the Saints love to do that. So I do think that to some extent, you're probably going to see a little bit more. And for example, the Saints, we haven't seen Rashid Shaheed return a kick yet in this format. I think there's going to be situations where elite returners have an advantage, and we haven't seen one yet with an elite returner. So we'll have to figure that out. But I'm interested to see Kene in action. He's a really good athlete. I tweeted some clips, or I found some clips on Twitter. For a guy who never gets any run game action, there's a lot of clips of him having some nice plays. He had a long touchdown run in the preseason. There's actually a clip of him against the Saints last year. He had an 8-yard run in that game where he made Pete Werner look real slow. But we'll see.
I think when you were talking about too, so we get overworked or too much hype around some of these waiver claims. I think this year, a lot of folks, including myself, expected offensive linemen to be addressed, and it just wasn't.
Yeah, well, that's why, when I say I don't think we've necessarily waited long enough to feel like we can make a strong opinion on the state of this roster yet, it's because I do think you're going to see at least one more move in terms of the offensive line. I don't know if you can go into the season with 8 offensive line. We're going to talk more about that when we break down the offense, but it's just not enough. And there's at least one player who's on the 53 right now who will either go to IR or be cut. And that's because the Saints have pulled off a trade for John Ridgway, defensive tackle.
Right.
That's not the position I expected them to be active at. They kept 5 initially. One of them was Kendall Vickers, who was cut technically to make room for Kene, but realistically, that's the move that you're corresponding with John Ridgway, who was with the Commanders, 3rd-year guy, a lot of experience. He's played in 32 games, I think he has 55 tackles, something along those lines. And so he's just a people mover. He's a big body in the middle of the line that I think is kind of your Colin Saunders replacement. Colin Saunders is dealing with an injury. He's supposed to miss some time. He was walking around in a boot in the locker room yesterday. Which it's a calf injury, which I thought that was strange. Usually usually that's like a foot thing. Right. But maybe they're just trying to make sure to keep it, I don't know, just keep it from extending maybe. If you kind of lock it up, it's going to make sure you don't mess with that muscle at all. That's probably what's going on. But they didn't really give up much to get him. I think the trade is they're sending their 2025 6th rounder to Washington, and Washington is sending back their 2025 7th rounder. Right. So when you consider the fact that I think Washington's going to be real, real bad, and the Saints are probably going to be somewhere middle of the pack, you're basically just sacrificing 20 or so picks on a late day 3 selection. So that's basically nothing. But I think, for what you're getting, it's, for the amount you're paying, basically for the investment you have to make, you got a guy with some realistic experience. So that's it's not terrible.
What was he, a former 5th round pick?
Yeah, former 5th round pick of the Cowboys, but he was cut prior to the season in 2022. He ended up on Washington and played a lot when he was there. So I tweeted a couple clips of him as well. There's one that's really fun of him basically full suplexing a guy. And it's worth noting that he and Chase Young were on the same defensive line. So I think there's at least some level of, hey, these guys have played together before, and they've, had some level of success, I guess. So we'll have to see. But that's the last move that is new.
Yeah, like you said, I'm still waiting, expecting something with the offensive line. And yeah, expected either a waiver claim or a trade, but that didn't end up happening. It was defensive line and a kick returner.
Yeah, and I would expect, I think Jalen Ford is a guy who would make sense in terms of heading to IR because you kept 6 linebackers, and I don't know if you need 6. And his injuries, his hamstring injury, so you could stretch that out if you wanted. Even if he should be back prior to week 5, you could probably pull that off. But we'll have to see. And before we move on, I do want to kind of hit biggest surprise cut, biggest surprise keep of the 53-man roster. And so let's start with keep. Who would you say was the biggest surprise that stuck around that maybe you didn't see coming?
Definitely didn't expect the Ivy Leaguer, Mason Tipton, to be on the 53-man roster. Obviously, the hype around him was great at the start of training camp, but then obviously dealt with injuries and didn't play in any preseason action, but still makes the team. It was a little bit odd there, but we were talking a little bit beforehand. Kind of makes sense that maybe the Saints figured somebody would have claimed him off of waivers if they did in fact let him go.
Yeah, I think that's what happened. Like we don't think we can sneak this guy into the practice squad because like you saw a couple of years ago, like Rashid Shaheed didn't play. Like people want to compare the situation to Rashid Shaheed, and I don't think you can because Rashid got cut. Like Rashid was coming off a major knee injury, didn't show anything in the preseason, and then ended up on the practice squad. Got called up. I want to say week 6. It was against the Bengals, and his first touch was for a long touchdown. It was that end around, jet sweep, whatever you want to call it. But Mason made the roster outright, and I don't even know if he's a guy that'll be active on game days because I just don't know if his skill set it's a little redundant when you consider this is an offense with Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. What I saw from him just in general is that he can be kind of an elite depth guy for if you need to replace one of those guys. Right? Like he can do a lot of the same things as a Chris Olave or a Rashid Shaheed, but I don't need 3 of those guys. So we'll have to see. Like I need receivers who can maybe go out there and throw a block. I need receivers who maybe can go out there and make a tackle on special teams. And I wouldn't say that that's his forte. But I think keeping a guy who did not play in the preseason is telling of how much they appreciate his skill set and what he was able to show in the first few weeks of camp, because that's not easy to do.
I'm just jonesing because I hadn't seen really anything from Tipton because I wasn't out in Cali. So it's like, what can this guy do?
Right. Yeah. But it's not like there's a lot of footage of him. Like, right. They don't let us record team drills. So only the people who are out in California even know what the Saints saw. And he was really close. It's funny. I put a lot of these projections out there and he was really close to making my 53-man roster projection going into the first preseason game. But then it was like in my head, I was like, I just don't know if you can do it. First of all, and second of all, the fact that he didn't play feels like an advantage because now you should be able to sneak him out of the practice squad. And I don't think they felt the same way, because that's one of the, when I say surprise, like I would have to have gotten it wrong on my roster projection to say I'm surprised they kept him. Like I had Rico Payton on my roster projection. That's not a surprise to me, right? Like there's several players that I was like, okay, I think this is going to happen. Even like Matt Hayball, Lou Hedley. I had Lou Hedley going into that game, but, in that roster projection, I had the names bolded that I thought, okay, these could flip if things go a certain way. And so that's what happened. I think the game went in such a way that the decision was made for you. And that last punt was, the nail in the coffin of Lou Hedley's Saints career. Genuinely, I think that. Now, you might have made that decision anyway, but I think that kick from the back of the end zone that ended up getting returned to the 25-yard line was the kind of nail in that decision.
Seen enough, as Sean Payton said once.
Yes. Yeah. And I don't know, like, and the reason I felt like it was close is because I don't think I've seen a ton of Matt Hayball either. Like he's been solid and he's definitely got a bigger leg, but I've seen some really sketchy punts from him too. We haven't seen a single kick of his pin a guy back inside the 20. Think about that. He's had chances.
Well, I know you've been scouting other teams' punters.
Yeah, a little bit. They clearly didn't feel the same way. That looks like they're going to go with Matt. But anyway, okay, so let's move on. Okay, biggest surprise cut. And this one was a little bit harder to find just because, there was a few players that they could have kept around, but never really felt like a likely option, right? Like Equinemius St. Brown, while he had a nice finish, I think it was always going to come down to him or Cedric Wilson. I think Cedric Wilson won that job weeks ago. You only need so many veteran blocking receivers, and they have one. A few other guys, like the running back position. I never felt like Jacob Kabodi, despite the big preseason game. I think he earned himself a spot on the practice squad with that performance. I don't think he necessarily earned himself a spot on the active roster. And I think if you watched how camp unfolded, that was pretty clear. But to me,
was James Robinson brought back to the practice squad or no?
No.
So that's a little surprise too.
I mean, I could see him coming back.
Right.
We'll see. But I think hey, maybe that's the difference is, I don't know what you were thinking of doing prior to that game, but you watch Jacob's performance and you feel like, hey, okay, maybe he's a guy who earned himself a spot in our practice squad, and that maybe cost James a spot, right? So you could talk about that. But to me, the two surprise cuts were not necessarily surprises because one guy got cut, but because both guys got cut. And the two examples I'll give you at safety, and I've always called Ugo Amadi a safety. And on my projection, I had one of these guys making it, but I kind of said it could go either way. And that's Jonathan Abram and Ugo Amadi. Now, I expected one of those guys to make it, one of those guys to get on the practice squad, and instead both guys got cut and both landed on the practice squad. And I think that's a consequence of trying to keep some of your younger players.
With Abram, too, that was kind of surprising just because obviously I think when we went into things, it was like he kind of felt like, all right, it's his starting job to lose, and he lost it.
Yeah, I think he got beat out by Will Harris for sure, and Jordan Howden was going to be here either way as your kind of dime guy. But I think it was really between Will and Jonathan, and Will won it. Now, will that work? No pun intended. I don't know, but we'll have to see. And then there was another situation similar, right? Like Kyle Hergel and Shane Lemieux. I didn't expect both of them to make it, but I expected one of them to make it. Instead, both got cut and both landed on the practice squad. And you only have 8 offensive linemen on your active roster, which is not enough. So we'll have to see how that works. But those were the two for me that, again, it's like, I'm not surprised that any one of those 4 individual players got cut.
Just both of them together, right?
Just that, the fact that all 4 of them got cut in those 2 groups individually was a surprise to me.
Well, you talk about, obviously Headley's bad day punting in the preseason finale. Shane Lemieux didn't do any favors for himself at center snapping the ball.
Well, I think that's the problem, right? I think if Shane showed himself to be a player that could back up multiple positions, that could be a guard center, I think he's on the roster right now. But as just a straight up guard backup, I think you could find those anywhere. I mean, I say anywhere, but that's not a premium that you feel like you need to keep on the active roster. You were able to get him on the practice squad, so he's a veteran player. He could have gone and signed somewhere else. He didn't have to go through waivers. And that's the difference, like a vested veteran versus a younger player. If you have 4 years of accrued NFL experience, and I believe that's like 8 games on the active roster to count as an accrued year. You could also be on a PUP list or like an NFI list to get that done. So like guys like Khalid Hudson, Jonathan Abram, Ugo Amadi, Shane Lemieux, there's at least Equinemius St. Brown. These are all guys who didn't have to wait around. They could have started shopping for other practice squad jobs or 53-man roster squad jobs, 53-man roster jobs immediately, but ended up back anyway. So those are the guys you can have up to 6 of them on your practice squad, and they'll be the ones who, like Jonathan Abram last year, I don't know how long it took, but they used up his 3 practice squad elevations very fast.
Right.
And by halfway through the season, you were like, okay, we'll make room for him. But at that point, you usually have a couple injuries that have developed. So it's a little easier to make some room on the roster than it might be to do right now. And I know the Saints do like to take advantage of that when they can. And if you're unsure, like if you're between, hey, I don't want to cut this guy because I think he might get claimed on waivers and we want to keep him around, versus a Jonathan Abram, it's like, I'm pretty sure we can get him back on the practice squad and do it this way. While that's annoying if you're a veteran player, and I can imagine that's frustrating if you're a veteran player, I do understand why you would do that. But all right, I think that's it. Anything else you want to note before we move on?
No, I was just curious to see, we talked a little about with the offensive lineman there. The Buffalo Bills released, a former Saint in Will Clapp, and I was wondering if he'd be someone that the team might end up bringing back in the mix. Definitely a local guy too.
And he can play center
and guard, right?
He's become a meme.
For what?
Oh, really?
No, I didn't see it.
Oh, I don't know. It's kind of inappropriate. But his name has become a meme on the internet. Like, and to the point that like you can just post his picture and people know who it is. Anyway, we don't need to get further into than that, but we'll clap. Pride of Metairie.
Yes.
Anyway.
Oh yeah, now I just Googled it. There's like a best collection of funny clap pictures on.
Anyway, yeah, I also had someone ask me like, hey, should the Saints trade for Trent Williams? And I understand why. And, this is a question I was asking earlier in camp, because like, yeah, if you can go get a left tackle that's elite, I don't really care how much you have to pay him to some extent. The problem for the Saints is, like I've always said, like you can make kind of big splash trades and I don't hate it. Like as long as your goal is to elevate yourself from a playoff team to a Super Bowl team, right? You don't make big splash trades to elevate yourself from a fringe playoff team to a definitely in the playoffs team. Because you're not, like that's mortgaging the future for the present, and the present has to be a Super Bowl. Like the Rams aren't going to say, man, we really screwed ourselves over by, making that Stafford trade and making all these trades and sacrificing first round picks, because they won a Super Bowl doing it. Right. And when that's the goal, when that's the realistic goal, like every team will say that's the goal, but when that's like the realistic goal in front of you, you can justify it. When it's a pie in the sky idea, which it would have to be for a team that hasn't made the playoffs in 3 years. It's just poor management. Because you would have to give up a lot in a trade,
right?
And then also pay him a insane sum of money, and you're a team that doesn't have a lot of cap flexibility to begin with. So you would be tapping out the cap again. If this was like the last couple of years of the Breeze era and you were all in that all in mode and you could swing it and you could find a way, by all means get it done. They're not there.
San Francisco's in a bit of a pickle right now with their wide receiver and left tackle.
Yeah, it sounds like Brandon Ayuk is getting close to coming back. The Bengals are, this is awkward scenarios all around with some of these like the Cowboys paid CeeDee Lamb,
sure,
and all their and because you don't want to be the team that's continuing to set the precedent of, okay, you want to get paid, definitely hold out because we'll pay you at the top of the market if you hold out. We will cave, and that's what the Cowboys have shown. Twice it's an idea, 3 times it's a trend, 3 times it's a rule, and now with Ezekiel Elliott, the lineman, Quentin Nelson, no, not Quentin Nelson, Zach Martin,
yeah, there you go,
Zach Martin, and now with CeeDee Lamb, all 3 of those guys, they were like, pay me. The Cowboys said, we'll figure it out. They said, bet. I'm not going to be here. Figure that out. And then after a couple weeks, they got their gigantic contract. What do you think Dak Prescott's going to do next year when he's on the market and you're like, we don't want to pay you $60 million a season, Dak? I think that's a little unreasonable. And he's like, all right, have fun with whoever the hell the backup is. Have fun with Trey Lance out there in camp. And then we'll have another discussion because I can afford that $50K a day fine because I'm already getting paid QB money. Anyway, that's a terrible position to be in as a team. Where
Cowboys are going to have problems too. What Micah Parsons is due soon.
They're going to have problems with every single free agent who feels like they're getting under their offer is lower than they want to. Every single free agent who are, especially ones that are not coming off a rookie deal. Now, coming off a rookie deal is tough because you haven't made that much money in the NFL yet. So that $50K a day fine is going to seem like a lot. But for like anyone who's already paid on that second deal and wants a third deal, they're effed. And CeeDee Lamb, I mean, that's a lot of fines. So once you accept those fines, you're committed because like you need to get that contract to pay those fines back. Like you're talking about millions in fines. But man, and like Jamar Chase is doing it to the Bengals now. Brandon Ayuk is doing it to the 49ers. And the Saints are going to have a situation with Chris Olave. They're going to have to pay Chris Olave.
I was going to say that's going to be coming up soon too.
I would guess it starts to become a conversation, assuming Chris has the year this year that I think he's capable of having.
Right.
I think that's going to start next year for him. So, because they're going to objectively pick up his 5th-year option, but like look at Jamar. Jamar's not willing to let it get to that point. He wants to deal with it now. So
I love how coach said the Bengals coach said, "Oh, Jamar's going to be back at practice." He was there, but he just wasn't there in pads and a helmet.
Yeah, it becomes a distraction, and that's just where we are right now. But all right, that's not what we came on here to talk about. But it's always interesting. We're going to wrap up that segment. This is Inside Black and Gold. This is our kind of roster breakdown episode. We haven't really broken down the roster yet, but we will start when we come back. We're going to hit on defense and special teams. Then in the final segment, we will hit on the offense and practice squad. Who dat? I'm Jeff Nowak. He is Steve Geller. You can follow me on Twitter at Jeff_Nowak. You can follow him at Steve Geller WWL. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that. Hit me up. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you want to see more of. It's a few people who DM me now, and it's like, oh, okay, like it gives me ideas for stuff I want to talk about. Nice. Because like that's just, sometimes my brain is just not there. Like the hamster is taking the day off. And
no, I love when the callers on WWL or like you said, a listener's feedback on anything. It's like, you know what? That'd be a great topic.
Yeah, right. It's just stuff to talk about. It's always I find it very like the Trent Williams thing. That was someone DM'd me yesterday. So should we trade for Trent Williams? And now this is what
I want to talk about that, right? Yeah.
So I always do appreciate that. DMs are open. But who dat? We'll be right back. Stick around. And we're back on Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. He is Steve Geller, and we're going to be going through the.
I don't know if anyone's asked for someone to slide into your DMs before. It's like, hey, come on in.
Oh, it happens all the time. It happens all the time. Just sometimes you don't want it, and it happens anyway. It's like I'm not the person that has people sliding into there. I'm sure there are people who have a problem with their DM slides in general. I'm not that person, right? Like I don't get a lot of
inappropriate going on.
Now I get a lot of scam DMs. I get a lot of people trying to say, "Oh, here's a free Bitcoin," and
you're like, "Oh, wow,
yeah, like, whoa, I'm so lucky. I can't believe they picked me." Anyway, yeah. So, but no, otherwise, I'm a pretty. It's usually about sports. So
no scandalous pictures being sent your way.
No, and please keep it that way. But anyway, we're going to go through the Saints the defensive half of the Saints roster right now and talk about specialists too. So let's get to the specialists first because it'll be quicker. So Zach Wood, long snap. When you find a long snapper that works, he's there for life. Like there's no reason to ever even consider changing your long snapper until he's like, guys, I'm tired. and they don't make a ton of money, so they'll play forever because they, it's a job. Zach Wood's good at it. So
pretty sweet gig too. You don't get banged up.
Right. They're not, and people aren't even allowed to line up over you. Like the only thing you can do wrong is screw up your snap. So as long as you're not screwing up the snaps, I don't care. I mean, not that I don't care, but it's never a position that I'm like, we could upgrade here. The best case scenario for a long snapper is we never say your name. And how often do you hear us talk about Zach Wood? So good for Zach sticking around. Blake Grupe, I've been pretty, I've talked about this before. It was a competition, but I don't think it ever got as close as people were making it out to be. I think people overreacted to the 65-yard kicks and forgot that the Saints don't kick 65-yard field goals in games, and no one does. DA
said it that night after the Tulane practice. I'm more concerned with 50 and in.
Yeah, and Blake has been very solid all camp. I think he struggled with the wind a little bit out in Irvine, but if you look at just the kicks that he's taken in Metairie and the Superdome and the games. Like if you erase the Irvine kicks where there was a kind of a weird win that you're not ever going to see in games, he's missed like one kick all year. Like he made his first 27 kicks of the offseason, and then he's made all 10 kicks he's taken in preseason games, right? So that's 37 kicks right there that he made. He made 6 of 7 at the indoor facility, with the one miss being from 61. Last week's practice, and then he made 7 for 7 at the Superdome in Friday's practice. So I mean, he won that job. Now you're keeping Charlie Smith around, and that was right. You will not convince me that the groin tightness excuse was not at least somewhat contrived to hide him in terms of like, we're not letting you kick a long kick in a game and people get a look at it because look, the Titans kicker that the Saints faced, the one who missed that 58-yard kick that Samson Nakua returned, he's the Packers kicker now. So there were teams out there scouting, and it was funny because Mike Haas on the broadcast was like, "Man, they're just letting this guy take kick after kick after kick, and like they're giving him a job somewhere else." Like he made that comment, and that's exactly what happened. He looked good enough that I know that he went out there. So like, it's not like hiding a guy is a bad idea. And if they went out there and gave him like 10 kicks in the preseason, they say, oh, "Okay, let's see what he got." Right. I think there's a good chance he gets claimed. They didn't, and they kept him around. And so this time next year, we'll be having the same conversation. I think that was a smart way to do it.
No, like you said, at least, the Saints made the decision. Groupie's your dude, and he's still got that pressure on him, obviously, with Charlie Smith still in the wings waiting.
Yeah, and I mean, this year is such a high-pressure year for DA, for the offense, for everybody, that you're not going to take that type of risk this year. Now, next year, who knows? Next year, if you have a different head coach and whatever, like things have changed, and you're like, man, the upside of this guy is too much to ignore. And also, like he said, now 2 years of kicking in the NFL. I just think it was never really a realistic scenario to say like, oh, he's going to win that job, as much as exciting as that leg is. But we'll see. We already talked about Lou versus Matt. After that kick, that kick off the back of the end zone, I just saw Lou on the bench, and he was just like sitting there by himself. And like a lot of times you'll be going around like practicing punts, even if it's not like a scenario where you're likely going to punt, you'll see these guys warming up just in case. And he was just sitting on the bench, head down, like staring at the ground. Like he knew that he had just blown his chance at that job. And that's why these competitions are stressful. And he was like the first cut of the day, right? Like whether he was the actual player who was cut first, he was the first name that came out, which means he was cut pretty early in the day. Because I think in most cases, when we're talking to agents, it's like, hey, have you got any news? And they're saying, yeah, he hasn't been, he hasn't heard anything yet.
Nothing yet, right.
Or he just got called up. And then 10 minutes later, he texts his agent, I'm cut. And then we find out. And then that's how it works. In case anyone was wondering how that all worked. I actually got one. It's it's tough to get those out first, because a lot of times these agents text like 5 different people at the same time, and everyone's like typing as fast as they can. Right. It's rare to have one that only you have, but I got Millard Bradford.
Okay.
I don't know. It's like the least exciting thing to get excited about. But Matt Hayball, I think he's just, the upside's a little better with the leg strength. I haven't seen him pin a kick once in preseason, and he hasn't been great at it. Like kicking, if the Saints end up kicking a lot from the 50 this year, like they did last year, I think we're going to be very frustrated with Matt Hayball really quickly, because that's something that Lou does well. And the downside is you don't get the distance on the shorter, on the kicks closer to your end zone. But if you're constantly giving up 20 yards in that exchange because you kick into the end zone, that's not good either. So we'll have to see. But he could become very frustrating for people really fast. It's a cool story now, but so was Lou this time last year.
Yeah.
And so we'll see. That said, I think if he can go out there and kick a 60-yard punt alone, people will just see that one time and be like, cool.
Wonder how stressed Rizzy is over this situation, because it seems a little uneasy.
I think he's very stressed about the punter. I don't think he's very stressed about the kicker.
No, for sure.
Anyway, this is why these podcasts always end up being 90 minutes long when I intend for them to be an hour. Anyway, defensive tackle. Now, we talked about this. The Saints kept 5. I think that's in part because Colin Saunders is dealing with a calf injury that's expected to keep him out a few weeks. He hasn't gone to IR yet. I think he might be a candidate based on how they feel about that situation. They initially kept Kendall Vickers. Instead, they traded for John Ridgeway. I keep trying to call him Jack Bridgeway because he reminds me of Jack Heflin. But Jack Heflin got cut. He was the only cut from that position. And so Nathan Shepard, Brian Brzee, Colin Saunders, Christian Boyd, and now John Ridgeway with Kendall Vickers to IR. The only surprise there was that they kept 5. And again, I think we know why.
We've got a little, not major breaking news, but a little spiciness on the Twitter telling us that the Atlanta Falcons are signing linebacker Monty Rice to their practice squad.
Okay. Yeah. I was curious what would happen with him. I never thought that he was going to make the roster. And the reason why is because he's getting paid on a 3rd-round pick contract. And you actually saved money by cutting him.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, because he was still like on that contract, his rookie contract from when he was drafted.
Yeah.
So he was guaranteed more money than you had to, like, he was making more than the minimum. And I never thought that was a likely scenario to keep him. But no, that's the Falcons like them some former Saints, man. It's just something they do.
That Terry Fontenot connection, right?
Well, even before that, they've done this. Like, who was the interior lineman they signed? Never really played here. White dude.
Yeah. Damn, I can't think of the name.
I can't remember his name either. But it was like, why are they signing him? You know, they just like to do that. But it never goes the other way. I guess we got Devontae Freeman that one time, but he didn't make the 53. Anyway, like Morton Anderson, Bobby Hebert, they've been doing it for decades, and it just rarely goes the other way. Anyway, defensive tackle, pretty straightforward. I don't think we need to spend a ton of time there. Defensive end, also very straightforward, right? Cam Jordan, Carl Granderson, Chase Young, Peyton Turner, Isaiah Foskey. The only surprise there is if you incorrectly thought that the Saints were going to cut Isaiah Foskey, which is something I've been telling you was not going to happen for weeks now. And so if you believe that, I don't know, it's on you, because they were never going to cut him. I don't think it was even a consideration they were going to cut him, because he's doing the work, guys. Like, he's there working hard, and it's just a matter of development, and you're hopeful as a team that the work behind the scenes eventually translates to the game. Now, I get it. I think what happens is, and this is not me trying to have an entitlement take, but I understand why, if you don't watch the preseason practices and you don't watch all of what's going on, you try to place an undue emphasis on the preseason games because it's what you see. And I get it. I understand that. But at the end of the day, there's so much more that goes into these decisions than I watched him in the preseason game and I wasn't impressed. Right now, that's a factor. It's obviously a factor, but there's a lot more to it than that. And that's what a coach would tell you. Why didn't you cut Isaiah Foskey? Because he's there every day. He's busting his ass. He's at every meeting. You know, like, I feel like he's taking steps forward, and we just haven't seen it translate to the field yet. That, particularly in year 2 as a high draft pick, is enough to keep you around. And that's why he's still here.
The old man brain finally kicked in. Back to the defensive tackle with the Saints and Falcons, Tyler Davison.
I knew it was a T. Tyler Davison, yes, that's it. I don't know if he even played for them, but yeah.
Right.
The only cut on the defensive end spot was Nico Lalos. He's a professional practice squad, man.
Yeah.
And I think, like, people would say, well, I want Nico Lalos because I've seen him flash in the preseason games, and you know, I get it, but like, there's potential. Like, you draft a guy in the second round because you see developmental traits that you value at a high level, and after 7 starts in the NFL or whatever, like, not even 7 starts, 7 games active in the NFL, that's not long enough to say, like, we're giving up on a guy. It's not. Any other notes on that position?
No, really, we can move on to the next one.
Yeah. Oh, Cameron Peterson ended up on IR too, which I don't remember when he got hurt, but
okay.
You know, that's a good result for a guy who was he was definitely not going to make a 53-man roster. Now he gets paid at least, right? So that's not a terrible result for a guy who shows up on a Friday and ends up on the IR list. Linebacker. So, like you mentioned, Monty Rice got cut, ended up with the Falcons. The rest of this list isn't a surprise, other than the fact that you kept 6 and 2 of them are injured players. And that was kind of where I was a little waffling on. Demario Davis, Pete Werner, Willie Gay, Anthony Orji, and then DeMarco Jackson has missed time with a calf injury. Jalen Ford has missed time with injuries to both hamstrings, which is frustrating. 5th round draft pick, both 5th round draft picks, right? DeMarco was a 5th round draft pick a few years ago, and Jalen Ford was a 5th round draft pick this year. We correctly kind of established that Anthony Orji had made this roster. It wasn't really a question. And then your cuts are Khaleke Hudson, Andrew Dowell, Isaiah Stallbird, and Mike Rose. I had one person say, like, Mike Rose should be on the roster over Jalen Ford. I was like, you're a big Mike Rose fan? Like, when did Mike Rose become this guy that we're gonna stand for? But no, that's another position that I don't think it's a huge surprise. But I do think it shows you, like, when you get drafted, they're gonna give you some leeway as to keep making the roster, and whether you think that's the smart move or not, it's just the reality.
Like I've said before too, unless there's someone genuinely there ready to take your spot, that's good, as good or better than you.
Yeah, and keep in mind, like, when you're a depth linebacker on a roster, you're not a starter. You're not going to get snaps in the regular defense unless there are injuries. So they're willing to say, hey, can you contribute at a high level on special teams? And if the answer is yes, and you're looking at a guy and saying, I think his developmental traits are better than this veteran who might have a higher baseline right now, you're typically going to go with the young guy. Because, it was the Jalen Smith situation last year. It was like everyone knows Jalen Smith's name. And yeah, if he has to start, you feel pretty good about what he can do. But what about running downfield and making a tackle on a kickoff? It's not something he's done. And is he better at it than the young guy? Probably not. So you keep the young guy. And that's probably where you are. A couple more positions, cornerback and safety. Cornerback, I guessed correctly. And it was a guess. Like I felt like Rico Payton had done a little bit more. I felt more comfortable in terms of keeping him on the roster than a Shamar John Charles. Rejon Wright got hurt, so that kind of made that decision for me. I talked to both Shamar's camp and Rico's camp. Shamar, they were frustrated. They felt like he had done enough to make this roster, and I tend to agree. Like he was running with the ones, he had a good camp, but I think that the Saints felt that Rico Payton was not going to get through waivers, and other teams were calling his camp the morning of cuts, trying to establish like, hey, do you think he's going to get cut? Because we'll be interested. Right. So, and I think, whether that's a game, whether that's something you tell a team that might be on the fence, like, guys, just so you know, so like that's a strategy that agents will take, whether it's true or not. But like this isn't like a super agent trying to play a team against themselves. Like this is just a young guy who has made really good progress coming from D2, getting better every day. He was I think he was the most targeted player in the preseason.
Yeah.
And he held up well. So, good for him. I don't expect him to see a ton of action. I think he's going to be a special teams guy if he's active on game days, but especially with some of these guys coming back healthy, but really cool for him to get there. And the cuts, Shamar John Charles, Joan Williams, Mac McCain, Rejon Wright to IR.
But we've mentioned it before, like you never know, especially it seems the corner position, there's a lot more injuries than I would have expected for some reason.
Yeah. I think when camp injuries are funny to me because there's so many times where I'm like, if there was a game this week, would that guy be playing?
Sure.
And so yes, there were a lot of injuries to cornerbacks. The knee injury was the most concerning for Kool-Aid because it's a knee and it's an impact injury, happens in a game, so you're not just being careful about it. And I think a lot beyond that, a lot was preventative, right? Preemptive. Rejon's was turf toe. And, like I said in the last podcast, like he knew coming off the field that his season was over. You could tell, you could see it on his face. And turf toe is a pretty easy injury to be like, oh yeah, that's bad. Like I could feel it. You're tearing you're a lot of times it's a torn ligament in your foot. And that's immediately that something went wrong down there. Even if you can kind of walk normally with it, you're not playing with it. So anyway.
Real quick on the corners, do you happen to see any of the Lonnie Johnson drama from yesterday?
Oh, I sure did.
Okay, that was interesting.
I kind of feel like everyone's so busy yelling about the backup quarterback that they kind of glossed over Lonnie Johnson throwing some serious shade at the team. Not like halfway shade. Not like when Mike Thomas would throw shade, a lot of times we would have to kind of parse it out and be like, who is he actually mad at? Who's he really trying to throw under the bus here? Like sometimes there's some gray area. Lonnie was just like, nah, F them. Like not going back.
Office, right. The front office really was pissed at.
Now, yeah, and he made it clear it was the office. It was the front office. He didn't point out to any of the coaches, which I don't know. Maybe there's some involvement there. But to me, that's, and this is me guessing, but to me, they didn't offer me the contract that that I felt like they should have. And he did get hurt. He was dealing with an injury. But he did make it sound like he wanted to go back to Houston. So, I don't know. Something must have happened. And he ended up going to Carolina.
Right. So now he's with the Panthers, so we'll see him.
They'll see him again. I have to imagine he had that contract in hand before he started sending out those tweets.
Right.
Because I think like when you're outspoken like that on social media, and you're trying to find a job, like you're not a star, you're a fringe guy who's just trying to make a roster.
Yeah.
That's a dangerous game to play.
Well, someone had tweeted out, wouldn't surprise me if the Saints would bring back Lonnie Johnson. And he retweeted that saying, it surprised me.
Yeah. He was ready. Like he didn't waste any time. And I don't know. I thought he seemed like it generally, like I only dealt with him a couple times when he was here. He seemed like they liked the place. And so I don't know what the front office necessarily did to draw his ire, but it's there. And that's the funny thing though. Like you look at it and you say, okay, do you have any former places of work that you kind of look at now and you're like, God, that sucked. I didn't like that place.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I do. I complain about my former workplaces all the time. Did I complain while I was there? Not as much because they were paying me.
Right.
Exactly. So I don't know. You have to take it with a little bit of a grain of salt of like, yeah, jilted former employee is going to be a little more outspoken than guys in the room. But hey, that was funny. I did see that. I felt like it was going to become a bigger thing, but it kind of got caught under the wash of everyone being mad about Spencer Rattler, which we will talk about more in the next segment.
I guess because it's Lonnie Johnson too. So it was like, yeah, whatever.
I don't think most people even remember who he is because he didn't play that much.
Right.
I thought he's a decent player. I wouldn't have hated to see him back. And when he got cut, I was like, oh, I wonder if maybe that's a situation where they might consider bringing him back. And
nope.
He made it clear pretty quickly that was not going to be the case. Okay, one more position. Speaking of safety, Saints only kept 4. And that was one fewer than I expected. Like we talked about in the open, I expected them to cut one of Ugo Amadi or Jonathan Abram and keep the other one on the roster. Instead, they cut both and sent both to the practice squad. So your safeties right now, you really only have 3 because JT Gray is a special teams ace. Right. And if you're seeing him playing in the regular defense, something has gone terribly wrong.
Right.
Tyrann Mathieu, obviously. And then the other 2 are Will Harris and Jordan Howden. I think, DA was asked if you've made a decision on the strong safety spot. He said yes, but he's not going to tell us who it is because that's what he does. That's a Sean Payton thing. And I think it's smart. Like, why would you, it's not necessarily a good thing to have to wonder who your starters are at any specific position, but it is something of an advantage if you can keep that a secret, particularly going into a game against the team. Like, you gain no advantage from telling the other team who to prepare for, like who to scout. You want them to have to scout both. You want them to have to wonder, okay, what does this guy do well? What does this guy do well? And say, hey, we think it's going to be this guy, but we don't know. So I get it. I'm not going to begrudge any head coach kind of trying to keep something a secret.
No, that said, like I've mentioned before, DA is way more forthcoming with injuries than I could have even imagined. So yeah. He doesn't hide much.
No, that's a Sean thing. Sean would never tell us stuff like that.
Oh, hell no, right.
So I'm not going to, like, people will want to be mad at him about everything. I'm not going to be mad about that.
Nah.
But that said, I do think Will Harris is your starting strong safety and Jordan Howden is your dime back. And we'll see how that goes, right? I think that could flip if Will doesn't perform at a high level and you want to make a change. Maybe you end up bringing Jonathan Abram off the practice squad and saying, hey, this is the guy anyway. Either way, that's the last position. And, I think when you talk about, okay, they only kept 4 safeties, that's not a lot of safeties. You're looking at it and saying, well, when you try to keep some young players at other positions because they're young players and because you project them to be good players and they might not be performing well right now, that's what costs you kind of the depth at some of these other positions. Now, if you can just have those guys be inactive and call up these veterans anyway, and that's what I think is going to happen, you kind of get the best of both worlds. But again, like I said, that's kind of a shitty thing for these veteran players who have put in the work and are now being told, like, don't go anywhere. We'll keep you around. Yeah. I would get pissed off pretty quickly if that was me. So I don't know. We'll see. But like, I do understand the business aspect of it. Like, it does make sense.
The safety position too, now that it's laid out a little more for you, just highlights even the massive whiff that the team had in their pursuit of Justin Simmons and weren't able to close the deal there, unfortunately.
Yeah, I guess. I do think it also is a signal that, hey, we might see a lot more cornerbacks on the field. Like, I think they're going to try to find ways to get Marshawn, Paulson, Kool-Aid, and Alante on the field at the same time. Now, does that mean you're playing safety? I don't know. Like, I think it's more of a dime situation where you still have 2 safeties on the field, in that instead of Jordan being your dime back, maybe Kool-Aid's your dime back.
Right. That makes sense.
See.
Yeah.
But that the numbers would indicate that, when you're keeping 5 corners and 4 safeties, you might be leaning toward a corner. And these are all, it's funny. You look at the draft investment, at least for the Saints, at these positions, right? You've spent one pick on your safety room, and that's Jordan Howden in the 6th round. Now, Tyron was a 3rd round pick by the Cardinals. Will Harris was I think he was a 3rd round pick by the Lions. I think he was a draft pick by the Lions. JT Gray was undrafted. You look at the cornerback room: Marshawn Lattimore, 1st round; Paulson Adebo, 3rd round; Kool-Aid McKinstry, 2nd round; Alontae Taylor, 2nd round. So these are the players that you've invested in, and I expect you're going to want to get them on the field. That's the defense and special teams. We're going to come back. Speaking of Miami, we're going to come back. We're going to talk about the offense. We're going to talk about the wide receiver room a good bit. Quarterbacks, we can get into the Spencer Rattler stuff, and we're gonna go from there. Who dat? Go Saints. We'll be right back. And we're back on Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. He is Steve Geller. We went through the defense. We went through special teams. We've already kind of gone through a good bit of the practice squad. We've mentioned the players that went to the practice squad. So I don't know if we need to go through the entire practice squad. We might list them. But this segment's going to be primarily about the offense. We can plug the practice squad onto the back end if we need to. But first things first, quarterback. Not a ton of question here. The only question in my mind was, hey, if you do end up saying like, okay, we've decided on Spencer Rattler as the backup, do you cut Jake? Now, they are not cutting Jake. And I think that's the right call, because if you don't feel like you desperately need that roster spot and you can continue to develop 2 players, I don't mind that. Now, that's not the case for everyone. And this is what Dennis Allen said on Tuesday,
right.
After cuts regarding the quarterback position.
They're still competing, and I really want that to be that way throughout the course of the season, that those guys are coming out here every day and they're competing. It's a healthy competition. I think both those guys have done well. And so I'm not in any way ready to make any sort of statement or comment or declaration, anything of that nature. We'll just let those guys keep coming out and working and practicing and getting better. And here's the deal. With both of those players, both of them, we've got to develop. And so we've got to find ways to get reps for these guys, whether it be on the show team or whether it be, extra sessions with some of the, young skill guys, things of that nature. Like they're going to have to continue to work to develop. I think that's probably the most unique thing and probably the bigger challenge of all this is that we have 2 young guys that need work, that need to develop, and there's only so many snaps you can get throughout the course of a week. So that'll be our challenge.
Surprise! People got mad about that. I say so. That was an ironic surprise. Like,
I think that what ticked off folks is just with the ongoing competition. How are they supposed to have a competition still ongoing?
Yeah, that's the part. I think people would have preferred to hear DA just say, "Hey, Dennis Spencer Rattler is our backup quarterback," and I get it. I understand. I think he's going to be, but we'll have to wait and see on that. Now, my question is, when is the last time you heard a coach come out 2 weeks before the opener and be like, "This is our backup"? Like DA won't even tell us who the starting strong safety is.
Right.
Like that's just kind of how he is. So I feel like the anger is coming in. Like, I can't believe he didn't declare Spencer the backup when I just don't know. Like, has that ever happened? Like, think back in the last 10 years for the Saints. When has there been an announcement saying like, yeah, this guy's our backup? Now, in a lot of cases, it's obvious, right? When Jameis was here last year, he's the backup. There was really no question. Although, like that, you could have said like, hey, why isn't Jake the backup? I don't know, because Jameis is here. When Teddy was here, it's obvious who the backup is. When Andy was here, it was obvious who was going into that season as the backup, right? When Chase Daniel was here, he's the backup. When Trevor Siemian was here, he's the backup. This is different. This isn't the same scenario as those things. And so I don't think we know how he should be handling this situation. That said, if you're keeping both guys and you want to develop both guys, I don't see the harm in continuing to have pressure on that competition, that's only going to make these guys better, right? Like shouldn't that be the goal for this guy to continue to develop? And I don't know why people feel like saying Spencer's the backup right now would help him is my question. Like how would that actually help him become the starter down the road, which is the goal for anyone who's angry that that's not a declaration that's happening right now. Like what's the actual assistance that's giving him is my question.
I'm just curious when the depth chart comes out too, are they going to have Derek Carr and then both names at QB2 when it comes out? That's a good question. I'm not sure, but like at the end of the day, they're going to have to pick one. Both 2A and 2B right now. Yeah, and I mean, we'll see how that goes. Like they're gonna on game days. I don't think they're gonna have both guys active, or at least not. Like I think you're gonna take advantage of the emergency third quarterback option, and both guys will be dressed out. Sure, but yeah. I think you're gonna declare one of them as that emergency guy, and if it's Jake, everyone's gonna lose their fucking minds. And again, I'm gonna say it's not the end of the world, but we'll go from there. I just think like anytime DA talks, we get mad about it. And I don't know, like there's so many problems with this team. That's like 99th on my list of like what I should be concerned about right now. Right. We've said it before. If either one of these guys obviously is in for the Saints, there's other problems that you should be worried about. Right. And if one guy goes in for the Saints, that means the other guy's the backup. So like there is value in making sure both guys are ready. You know, like people forget NFL teams used to keep like 4 quarterbacks. Like the idea that you should only have 2 that you're getting reps to is a very new thing. And that's the question. It doesn't really matter to me in terms of like who you're declaring as that backup. Now I want to feel good about who goes into that game and can win that game if they have to get into a game. And that's a different conversation from if Derek misses a week and you have to pick a guy to start that game. That's another conversation that I'm not sure. Like, but those are 2 different conversations in my mind. But the bigger question is how do you split up the reps throughout the week? Because there's only so many reps. And you're splitting up the leftover reps between 2 guys because Derek's getting the first team reps. So you're talking about the backup reps and how many of those are there to begin with. So are you splitting them? And is that impacting one of those guys in terms of you want him to develop, but he's not getting enough of the work? That's a question that I don't know the answer to. We'll have to see. In the game week, is it going to be different than this week? I don't know. But this freaking out about the backup thing is, I just think it's very disingenuous of like, is this really going to change your opinion of anything? Is this really something that you're mad about because it's affecting anything on the team this year? Or are you mad about it because you think the agenda you're supporting is somehow going to be impacted by the team who does not give a fuck what you think? And that's where we are. I get the excitement for Rattler, but yeah, it's a little too much. It's not just about Spencer is my point. It's about so many other things, and he's become this like masthead for change, like, this great hope of difference, and anything that impacts that in a negative way is going to be shouted down like it's the worst thing that's ever happened. Even if it's not even impacting that. Like, we don't even know. We're getting mad about something that hasn't happened yet. But either way. To me, I'm just happy the Saints look like they got a bargain in the 5th round with him, and definitely anxious to see what he can do going forward. But I hope we don't see him on the field this year. I know that's crazy. Yeah. If things go well, you'll never see him on the field. No, right. Right. Now, the Saints have had to use a backup quarterback like every year for like, it seems like the last decade, going back to 2017, right? Not 2017, 2019. Like every year since 2019, they've had to have multiple games finished by a backup. Like you didn't see any started last year, which was actually a change because prior to that, you've seen Trevor Siemian have to start games, Taysom Hill have to start games, Andy Dalton start a lot of games. Teddy Bridgewater start 5 games, right? So like you'd hope there'd be a season where the starting quarterback can start and finish every game, or at least only come out if it's like for a good reason. And we'll see. But my only issue
and that's not true. I have several issues. I have a lot of issues, but one of my issues is like, there's this idea that, so if you're a person that wants to see Derek Carr gone and you're like, I just need this guy off my team.
Right.
Watching a team develop multiple quarterbacks shouldn't be a negative thing for that agenda. It should be a positive thing for that agenda, because if you're going to get rid of Derek Carr, you're going to want to have his replacement and the backup to that replacement. Having multiple options is not helping Derek Carr, right? Like, I just don't see how that hurts the scenario in any way, is my point.
Overall, honestly, though, with the quarterback position, I'm surprised the Saints decided to opt to do it this way and not have that veteran that's been around the block to back up Derek Carr, because both of these guys are obviously unproven.
Well, when they brought in Nathan Peterman, everyone freaked out about that.
Well, yeah, I don't really care for that choice of a veteran backup.
Just I don't know. I've given up on the idea that we could have a rational conversation as it pertains to Derek. We can't. It's not possible.
Derek or DA, right?
Or DA, yeah. It's all a thing. But either way, this is the quarterback position. You kept 3. It was the least least interesting position in terms of who you're going to keep, but it ends up being the one we talk about the most. So we'll go from there. You kept 3. You didn't cut any because Nate Peterman was cut long ago. And we're going to go from there, and we'll see how they handle it, and people are going to put way more weight on this decision than it probably needs to. But that's how it works. All right. Running back / fullback. Now, this is a group that I've always put Taysom in during these projections. So I'm continuing to put Taysom here because while he's listed as a quarterback, it doesn't make sense to list him with the quarterbacks. Like, you don't have 4 quarterbacks on the roster. You have 3 quarterbacks and a Taysom, and what his role is going to be feels most like a fullback. So I'm putting him here, which means you have kept 5 running backs / fullbacks. That's Alvin Kamara, Jamal Williams, Jordan Mims, who we correctly established as the RB3. It felt that way, and it was true. Adam Prentice as the kind of fullback, and Taysom Hill as kind of the half fullback. Not a halfback. An HFB, if you will. That's what I'm going to start calling him. Taysom Hill, the HFB, the half fullback. You cut James Robinson and Jacob Kabodi. Kendre Miller to IR, designated to return, which is the only one so far that we've used. You can get, I think there's 8 total of those you can use throughout a season. And Jacob Kabodi to the practice squad. So I think that the only question I had was whether you would try to get James Robinson out of the practice squad. You went with Jacob Kabodi instead. Otherwise, that went exactly how we predicted it would.
Yeah, and I was wondering if they would keep 2 running backs on the practice squad, but I guess that wasn't an option.
I mean, James hasn't signed anywhere as far as I can tell, so there's a possibility
be someone that's available on the street if you still want him.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it benefits him necessarily to sign to the practice squad immediately, right? Like, there's going to be opportunities for him somewhere. Like Dalvin Cook signed to the Cowboys practice squad. Like, there's going to be teams looking for veteran options at some point. So we'll see. But
there's fans everywhere though too, because I know you know that Cowboys fans are going nuts right now, going, I can't believe we've got him on the practice squad. What a steal.
Got a Des Bryant feeling about it.
Yeah. Exactly.
Des Bryant to the Saints, I should say. It's going to be the same for wherever Mike Thomas signs. Everyone's going to freak out, and who knows what he's going to do. Maybe he'll have an impact. Maybe he'll practice once and never be seen again.
He'll probably end up in Pittsburgh is my guess.
It's possible. I mean, I do think he'll end up somewhere for a team that feels like they're a contender. Maybe a Buffalo. They seem to not like to invest in the wide receiver position.
Although they got rid of one Moody receiver. I don't know if they want to bring another Moody one in.
Stephen Diggs?
Yeah.
He just seemed like a drama guy, but
yeah,
I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, moving on to tight end, which I would argue is the weakest position on this roster still. Juwan Johnson's back. Woo-hoo. He got kept. Foster Moreau, Dallin Holker, who, you could say like we went through the surprise keeps. I don't think it was a surprise, but it was definitely one that you could possibly seen going the other way just because of the timing of that injury, the ankle injury.
Right.
He missed the final 2 preseason games. And in the one he played in, he was solid, but he dropped the pass. Like, he wasn't perfect in that game either. Still, it kind of shows you they kept 4 UDFAs. He's one of them. And, that like fans really like his upside. I really like his upside. Clearly the team likes his upside and they kept him around. They cut Mason Fairchild, and then Kevin Rader, the other tight end, went to IR, but he's done. He's not designated to return, so he'll be done for the season.
And Michael Jacobson, right?
Yes. I didn't have him on this roster that I'm reading. I screwed up because I did not have him on the cuts. But yes, they cut Michael Jacobson as well.
He thought he was playing basketball again.
I have him listed as my two-way athlete position. He's also on the practice squad. Michael Jacobson. He definitely didn't help his cause to make the roster, but I'm glad they kept him around.
Right.
You can't teach 6'7", right? I think he's still got some development, but I think there's something to like there, and we'll see how that goes down the road. He's more of a pass catching option than anything else, but he has gotten bigger. He has bulked up a little bit. I noticed that yesterday because I remember seeing him in the locker room last year and thinking like that's a tight end, and he's tall, but he was like a beanpole. Right? He looks like he's put on some bulk. So maybe that's someone who can make an impact down the road. I think you were pretty close between him and Dallin throughout camp, and Dallin just had a little bit more consistency. He's a more polished player at this point, so he makes sense to keep around. But yeah, Michael Jacobson, thank you for correcting me.
No problem. And yeah, with Holker, there was just a whole lot of buzz going around him with the fan base going into just like rookie mini camp even.
Yeah. No, and he's got highlights. Like he's a pass catcher. Like, and he's got some real ball skills that you should be excited about. But there's a level of rawness there in terms of the other part of what being a tight end is in the NFL, and that's blocking. Like everyone gets super excited about pass catching tight ends, but it's hard to make a roster in the NFL if you can't do both. And you have to be so elite as a pass catcher to do that. And I don't know if he's that, but there is a quality player there. He's a little undersized, so we'll see how that goes. I thought he held up reasonably well as a blocker throughout camp. Right now, when the other team is actually trying to blow you up, as opposed to, they're not allowed to tackle or you're not even in pads, that changes. But I think he did show reasonably well, and that's what I think keeps you on this roster is you showed enough to feel like, hey, there's upside.
You mentioned just real quick with the blocking. 40-year-old Mercedes Lewis still in the league. The Bears signed him to their roster. I can't believe they just went through a list on like Good Morning Football of people in his draft class and things that have happened as long as this guy's been in the NFL. Really amazing for him. Kudos. But yeah, 40-year-old tight end still around.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
40-year-old anything. 40-year-old baseball player. Like Rich Hill re-signed to the Red Sox, and it's like he's still playing. Like, but that's baseball. We're talking about football. So yeah, that's pretty crazy. You can start calling him the Infinity Stone. I used to call Frank Gore the Infinity Stone.
Yeah,
maybe
there you go. Right.
Lewis now. All right. Now moving on to wide receiver. This was an interesting position. We talked about Mason Tipton. We don't need to get too much into that, but really cool to see him stick around. He's a fun story, Yale kid. Really kind of got overlooked in the draft process. And I think the development that he's had throughout his OTAs and minicamp has been impressive because I think he's a guy who now can probably run the full route tree. I don't know if he could when he came into camp. A.T. Perry, Bub Means, these are guys that you could have argued, hey, maybe you go a different direction, but these are draft picks, both fifth round. Actually, I think Bub was a fifth rounder. I know Bub was a fifth rounder. I think A.T. was a fifth rounder. It might have been a sixth rounder. I always mix up him and Jordan Howden. One was a fifth and one was a sixth. I actually think A.T. was the sixth, and it was the pick you got back in the Adam Troutman trade. But both those guys are around. Cedric Wilson, I said this earlier, but to me, when you looked at Cedric and Equinemius St. Brown, one of those guys was going to make the roster. That was my read initially, and I really think that's what happened. And Equinemius kind of put himself behind the eight ball with the injury. He had a hamstring injury in camp, missed a good bit of time. Cedric had an injury too. He was able to get back a little earlier, and I just think as a blocker, he is a little superior in that role. Equinemius has a lot to like. He's on the practice squad, so you have him around. If you do want to call him up, you can. They also cut Stanley Morgan Jr., Samson Nakua, Kevin Austin Jr. also to the practice squad, and obviously Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed are at the top of that position.
I think I mentioned it. Surprised that Nakua wasn't on the practice squad, but I still haven't seen him getting picked up anywhere else at the moment, at least.
Yeah, he hasn't signed anywhere. I we'll see how that goes. I like Samson. I could see him coming back. Again, I think there's one more spot that has not been accounted for, and I just don't know when that will necessarily free up, because there's a waiver, and I think you have to apply for that waiver to get that free practice squad spot. Yeah. And right now, I think it is being occupied by Charlie, and we'll see. I don't know. But they have only signed 16 players right now, and I believe they will be able to sign another one to the practice squad. Rasheed, I'm very intrigued about. And one of the things that I was able to talk to Rasheed about in the locker room was, my read on this room is like, everyone wants to look at the 49ers and what the 49ers have done. And obviously, yeah, sure, Clint Kubiak came from that offense, the scheme. But I again, and I've said this on this podcast, I look to the right. I'm not looking to the left. I'm looking that direction over to Florida, to Miami, because I see Rasheed and Chris as a very similar type of receiver, as similar duo to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. And you also have Cedric Wilson, who played with those guys. And I asked Rasheed in the locker room yesterday if he agrees with that, and this is what he had to say.
So obviously Seth came from Miami. I'm curious, like you and Chris, it feels like the speed combination that they have down there, it feels similar, right? Do you see some similarities with what they did with that core group, and obviously Seth there with Tyreek and Jalen, and what you and Chris can do?
Yeah, 100%. And Seth will say it himself. He sees a lot of stuff that he saw with Tyreek and Waddle, with the speed and the routes, and he's able to kind of work underneath and do what he does. He thinks that we could be up there with the great offensive playmakers in this league.
So you guys have talked about that, like the kind of comparison?
Yeah, 100%. I ask him all the time, how, because I'm interested in myself, because obviously Tyreek and Waddle are very explosive players, and he sees that we can do the exact same thing.
Which one are you?
Tyreek.
Yeah, so Rasheed is Tyreek. I don't know if Chris would necessarily agree with that, but no. And so Cedric Wilson obviously spent last year in Miami. He knows a thing or two about the offense that they run over there, and the combination of Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. So, I can say that it doesn't mean shit, right? I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm talking out of my ass 90% of the time. Cedric says that. He's got a frame of reference for it, and I don't think he's throwing around that comparison lightly, right? I think that if he's saying that, he means it. And when I asked Rasheed that question, he didn't have to, he was like, oh yeah. Said that, and has said that. Like, it's a conversation they've had multiple times. So I think that I'm excited about that group and how they can kind of use them similarly to what Mike McDaniel's doing down in Miami. And that, I would argue, has been a much more dynamic system than what the 49ers are running. The 49ers have been excellent, but that was a Dolphins team that scored 70 points in a game last year. They turned Raheem Mostert into a star. And Raheem Mostert was also in San Francisco and played well. Right. But between him and Devon Achane, these are not necessarily guys that you went into the season saying these are going to be these elite high production running backs. The system produced to that. And I think you could, to some extent, put a lot of different names in that scheme and get elite production out of it. So I'm excited if they're looking at this the same way, because I think they could do a lot of the same things.
Yeah, the comparison, I would think Olave and Shaheed would definitely appreciate that. And hopefully they can duplicate those numbers. Obviously, Tyreek Hill, I don't know. It's hard to imagine. He's just in a different class of his own when it comes to speed. But I think Rashid Shaheed can be up there with the things he can do as well. And I don't know. I just think there's, besides wide receiver for him, interested to see if that Clint Kubiak can get some other ways to find him and get the ball in space some.
Yeah, I think that's the important thing is to replicate what they're doing. You need the quarterback to put the ball in a spot where they can catch it and run. And that was an issue throughout the preseason. Right. It was an issue last year. And to me, that will be the greatest sin of Derek if he's unable to do it. Because not taking advantage of the athleticism of those guys is something that I will put on the quarterback. It's not on the offense. It's not on the play call. If you're putting the ball in a spot where guys can't catch it and run and they have to constantly be rescuing balls behind you or coming to a complete stop and just trying to not die. Like, that is a problem. And I need to see Derek be better there. Like, there's this idea that everything Derek does is terrible and we should be mad about everything and whatever. I do think that criticism is legitimate, and it limits this offense. It limited it last year, and especially in this new scheme, you got to be better with that. So we'll see how that goes. Otherwise, that was a pretty straightforward position. I think I had Stanley Morgan on my roster projection. They didn't keep him on the practice squad either, so I misread that for sure. I thought maybe they'd keep him around as a special teams guy, but they did go out and find a running back who I think they can be that four core special teams guy. So maybe that created that is that guy. So maybe you didn't need Stanley to fill that role. Either way, yeah. Anything else on that before we move on to the last position?
No, like you mentioned, obviously with Derek Carr, I don't know. I kind of put him just slightly below Tua, I think, as a quarterback.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. Like, does anyone look at Tua and say, like, this is a top 5 quarterback?
No.
Because he led the league in passing yards last year. Right? How many passing yards did he have? Let's see. Yeah, Tua had 4,600 yards, 4,624. Jared Goff was next, 4,500. Dak Prescott, 4,515. Josh Allen, 4,300. Then Brock Purdy, Pat Mahomes, Jordan Love, C.J. Stroud, Baker Mayfield, Trevor Lawrence, Matthew Stafford, Sam Howell, Derek Carr. Right. So, like, the scheme is what allows him, and a lot of that's catch and run. Like, I don't have the yak numbers in front of me, but I have a feeling if he ranked quarterbacks by yak, he'd be pretty high on that list. So, again, taking advantage of that.
And to your point there, too, Brock Purdy probably, too.
Yeah, right. And, like, you don't need to throw the ball 60 yards to get a 60-yard completion. Right? And so that's what, I think it's possible. Derek leads the league in receiving yards, and everyone's still going to say he's not good. Because that's what people say about Tua. Everyone's like, Tua's like, why are we overreacting to? So I don't know. Like, that's how this offense can help you as a team. But yeah, and here's the thing: where the next position we're going to talk about is the offensive line. One way to help the offensive line is to get the ball out of your hands quickly and let the athletic guys do athletic things.
That might be my biggest knock on Derek. He doesn't get rid of the ball quick enough.
When he's playing well, he gets the ball out decisively. When he's struggling, yes, I think
he tends to hold it, right?
He questions reads, and he's like he, especially when it's like a 3rd and 8, and he's just trying to make something happen. And like sometimes you just gotta trust that the guy you get the ball to is going to make a play. But then you get yelled at and say you check the ball down too much. So anyway, it's either empty yards or check down. He's either the empty yards emperor. I think that's a Matt Moscona thing, or I've heard like check down king. That's another one. So it's like whatever totalitarian leader that we want to give him.
Yeah, I was also told when you point out the obvious success that Carr had at the end of the year, and it's like a lot of his stats were padded because of garbage time. And I'm like, whatever you want to say, man.
I mean, I don't really, I don't care about garbage time as long as you're winning those games. Anyway, one more position that's offensive line, and this is a position I expect to see changes at, mainly because you only have 8 of them right now, and that's doesn't sound like enough. I mean, you have, I think your starters, and I think Trevor Penning is still your starter right now. That could change, but for now, I don't see any indication that you're not going to at least give him a chance to be that starter. Now, will he make it through week 1 still the starter? I don't know. But right now I have him there. So you have right tackle Trevor Penning, right guard Cesar Ruiz, center Eric McCoy, left guard Lucas Patrick. Again, that's a position that could change too. Left tackle Taliesin Fuaga. Now the backups: Oli Udoh, Nick Saldiveri, Landon Young. That's it. And you could argue that, hey, between those guys, you do have a backup at every position because Oli Udoh can play tackle and guard. Nick Saldiveri is a guard, so when he gets in there, he should be able to. He might start when he's healthy over Lucas Patrick, and then Lucas is a center who can play guard. So you could move Lucas to center, and he'd be your backup center. Cesar Ruiz is also a center in terms of skill set, so you could use him as well. So you do have guys who can play center, and then Landon Young is a guy who has played tackle and guard. So as long as you don't lose more than 3 starting offensive linemen in a game, you have guys who could play every position. and maybe that is enough. And you elevate a guy from the practice squad. You have Kyle Hergel, Shane Lemieux on the practice squad, and you elevate one of those guys, and that's your 9th. I don't think that's 8. I still don't think 8 is enough.
That was a show.
8 is enough?
Yeah.
8 simple rules. Anyway.
No, and the thing is, though, it's like, obviously, if you're not making a trade, there's not a starter available on waivers right now.
No, and you cut Kyle Hergel and Shane Lemieux, you cut Tremaine Ankrum, you cut Mark Evans, you cut Josiah Ezram, he's the only rookie that got cut, and you cut Jesse Davis. Josiah, Kyle, and Shane came back on the practice squad. So between the active roster and the practice squad, you have 11 offensive linemen. And I think that you're typically going to want 12 to 14 because guys get hurt, right? Like, and so I don't know. We'll see. I think over the next week you might see a name added. Maybe you don't. Maybe they do feel comfortable early in the season using practice squad elevations to cover those gaps. But we'll find out. Either way, it's not a strong position.
I'm not going to lie. When I saw the one cut of Ankrum, I'm like, who is that?
He was the guy that got signed midseason. He and Jesse Davis, I think, got signed on the same day.
I remember Jesse Davis, but for whatever reason, Ankrum, I'm like, who is that dude?
He was wearing 79. You know, when they were doing the cuts, I had a file where I was doing like quick takes on everybody, and it's tough to come up with something to say about Tremaine Ankrum. He was a guy on the field playing football.
There you go.
Like, he never threatened to make the roster, and he was never bad enough to get cut, at least not prior to cuts. Like, he never got hurt, which good for him. Him and Jesse Davis, but at least like I saw Jesse Davis do stuff. Like Jesse was at the tackle spot. Like, he was with the second team a few times. Anyway, that's it. And you know, as we mentioned the practice squad, we went through most of them, but I can at least read you the full list of the practice squad before we wrap things up here, in case anyone's wondering. We didn't go into them, so that's the wrong list. Hold on.
Jeff has many lists.
I do. I have so many lists. Practice squad: safety Jonathan Abram, wide receiver Equinemius St. Brown, linebacker Isaiah Stallbird, guard Kyle Hergel, offensive tackle Josiah Ezram, offensive lineman, interior lineman Shane Lemieux, tight end Michael Jacobson, kicker Charlie Smith, not Smith, defensive end Nico Lalos, running back Jacob Cabote, linebacker Khalid Hudson, safety Millard Bradford, defensive back Ugo Amadi, wide receiver Kevin Austin Jr., tight end Mason Fairchild, defensive tackle Kendall Vickers.
Woohoo!
Vickers Vapo Rub. I'm sorry, that was bad. I apologize to the Vickers family.
Maybe, hey, not if he gets a commercial deal out of it.
There you go. Hit me up. Now hit Kendall up. All right. You ready? Did we do this? We get this done?
Let's do it.
All right. Who dat? That's it. We'll be coming back next week. You know, we'll have to come up with some topics. We'll be preparing for the Panthers as we do, but
I'm amazed the Saints put out their schedule already for the media. I was so excited. Like, wow, we know what's going on already.
We'll find out, and I'm sure we'll have more backup quarterback conversations. That's always fun, and
sure.
And we will go from there. But who dat? Thanks everyone for hanging out, everyone for listening. This is it's a bit of a slog. Going through the entire roster is tough.
Just imagine how the coaches feel going through cuts.
That's a good point. Point. We got through it in 90 minutes. I bet it took them longer. But all right. Thanks everyone for listening. We'll be back at it next week. Game week.
Carolina Kitty Cats. Let's go.
Meow.
Yeah.
Peace.
Later, folks.